I'm Elise Moore, City of Douglas.
Aaron Cardona, Rebel's Farm.
Ron Bemis, 7R7 Ranch.
Joni Giacomino from Bisbee. If members of the audience that are online want to introduce yourselves, you can please type in your name into the chat box on the website. We have a quorum. Is there a way to silence the agenda item number 2, meeting logistics, Nick Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some meeting logistics. For the public in attendance, we ask that you please keep your phone silenced. We ask that all present online please keep your audio muted during the meeting. If any member of the public who would like to speak to the council, be called to the public, will be the time to do so. If you are attending virtually, please indicate in the chat that you would like to speak and you'll be unmuted. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to ADWR's website and YouTube page once the recording is generated. Presenters, please add on the next slide on presenting your agenda item. And for those attending virtually, if you experience any technical issues preventing you from seeing the slides that are being presented today, you are welcome to make use of the PDF version of the slides linked on the public meeting calendar entry for today's date on ADWR's website. I will also include the link to that in the chat box. Finally, if you're experiencing any other technical difficulties, please contact our help desk. Their contact information can be found on the screen. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3 is the hydrology update. Emily?
Hi, my name is Emily Dolce. I'm the manager of the Groundwater Modeling section at ADWR. Although my name is on the agenda, I'm actually here with Sarah Lundgren. She's a hydrogeologist in my group, and she has been involved in Douglas AMA model development since the beginning. So she'll be going through what we've done so far. So just a quick background on our group. We are a team of engineers and geologists, and what we do is we develop, calibrate, and maintain numerical groundwater models for AMAs across the state of Arizona. And because the Douglas AMA is new and doesn't have a model, we've been working on this since the inception. So with that said, I can begin with Tio.
And I apologize, I forgot to have the ADWR staff introduce yourself.
I'm Sarah Linehan. I'm going right now. Not too big of a deal.
Just a quick note before we proceed. I'm getting a few messages from folks online. If everyone who's presenting could project their voice a little bit. We have a room mic here that's should pick up all the sound in the room, but when you present, just make sure you project your voice.
All right. Next slide, please. All right, again, I'm Sarah Linehan. I am the groundwater modeling supervisor, and I'll be giving you an update on the Douglas AMA website. All right, just a quick agenda. I'm going to go over what a groundwater model is and how we use them. I'm going over the model grid and theory that includes the elevations for the different units. I'll go over what a steady state model is, and that's the part of the process we are in for the model, and then I'll also go over model inflows and outflows. The last item will be our next steps, next items we need to do. This map is just an aerial photo of the Douglas area. That black outline you see on there is our active model area. Pretty blocky because of the cells, so it's a like a cube structure. We'll see that at the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, our first slide is the model overview. What is a groundwater model and how are they used? So we built these for all the AMAs, and there are a few other areas like Puma and St. Pedro that also have models, but they're basically just simplified numerical solutions to real world problems. And so on the first image, you kind of see there's like a big grid and there's a bunch of blocks and cubes in it. And that's a good idea of what our 3D groundwater models look like. So you see the 2D version right there. That is the active area of our model. And what it looks like in 3D is very much like that image next to it. Each little cell is a 3D cube and it has specific information about geology, or the water from that region. We use these models to devise management decisions, and we also use them for future scenarios. Next slide. Okay. So this is getting into the meat of the Douglas model. So the search image you're seeing here, the black outline is our AMA boundary. The purple outline is our active model remaining. So this is more of a steady boundary. And then you see the Douglas grid in the picture. That yellow, the grid, same image you just saw on the last slide. But one of the things I want to point out here is there is a refinement in this grid. So most of the squares you see here are about a mile by about a half mile by half mile. The area along by our draw is refined. So we basically made those areas smaller so we could simulate it better. We think that there's some surface water interaction if we want to get in there. So just think of those as tinier cubes so we can have more specific information. So those are about a quarter mile by quarter mile long, and that's that big line you kind of see going through the center of the model. Vertically, we have 3 layers in our model right now. The top layer, layer 1, is only 60 feet thick. It is just simulating our whitewater draw. The second layer is our upper valley fill, so that's our first kind of unit for the aquifer, and then layer 3 is the lower valley fill. I'm only going to talk about these in terms of hydrostratigraphic units and the rest of this, but we just wanted to make the distinction that layer 1 is just the surface water there. Next slide, please.
And presenters just noted that those microphones they're attached to mics that you can turn on speaking of those. Yeah, still protects these microphones, everything we got.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. It's a little better. Okay. Let's see. So this slide is just showing some of the research that we're doing. Looks like some of my there, but that's okay. So this figure is just from a report by some researchers named Coates and Cushman. It's from a 1955 report that went over the entire Douglas Basin. And this is just a cross section kind of showing you what the subsurface might look like in the Douglas area. So this is kind of an interesting figure. The white space you see that doesn't have any pattern in there, that's kind of interbedded in cross section, that is silt and clay, and we also have a determined supports leaching. And these units do not allow water flow to go through them. So groundwater does not move very low for these units. And the rest of the stuff in there is mostly sands and gravel. So the larger textures you see kind of around the edges are sands and gravels, and then it's more just kind of fine sand, silt, and small gravel in the middle in between all those clay units. I wanted to show you guys this figure because it shows how complicated this basin is. There's some quirks because of the leaching in this area, and that impacts recharge. Next slide, please. All right, these next few slides are getting into our model grid and the elevation for all of them. The model grid, as I said, is split up into different layers, and one of the key things we need to do as hydrogeologists is to split out the hydrostratigraphic units. So that's just units that actually contribute to groundwater storage flow. Water can move in these units versus bedrock, which doesn't allow water to move through. So these next slides are going to be looking at the hydrostratigraphic unit rather than lithologic. So instead of rock units, it's kind of more it gathers information. It's a larger unit. Anyway, with that little caveat, the main information we use to determine these surfaces were well logs, and then we also have some contours and digital elevation models. So
see, I told you. Told you.
The well logs, we have some challenges that we reviewed over 2,000 well logs for this area. And we only found about 300 that were of good quality to determine a surface between our upper and our lower valley fill. So the dots you see on this map here, they're color coded based on how deep we think that contact between the upper and the lower valley fill is. So on the edges, you can see our lighter yellow dots. Those are very shallow contacts. We think that lane 2 delineation is pretty shallow up there. That's near the mountains. That makes sense. There's more hard rock in that area, and the elevation goes higher there. And as we get into the middle of our basin, there's more purple, dark purple, and black dots. And that's just indicating that we think that layering is much deeper beneath the surface for the players. So just to refresh here, the upper and the lower valley fill, The upper fill is much finer, there's more sands, there's more small gravels, clays, leachy layer of mentioning, and then the lower fill is much sort. So that's kind of some of the stuff. These rocks. All right, next slide.
And present it again, just make sure you're ready to stuff on.
Okay, all right, this next. There we go. Okay, this next slide is talking about the model grid a little bit more specifically. So again, this left side is showing the location of these two cross sections you see on the right side. So the left side, those two black lines are the locations of where these are. So the top cross section we see is going from west to east across the center horizontally across the basin. And this is just showing you what our elevations look like for the upper fill and the lower fill. So the upper fill is that lighter blue color, and then the lower fill is that green color. And then we also show our layer 1, which is just the whitewater draw split out. In that darker blue, there's a little call out box over the cross section to kind of show you. Again, that unit is only about 60 feet thick. That's why it's so tiny there. And that's just so we can see the surface water and groundwater interaction. But the main thing here is our lower valley fill is very, very thick. So you'll see that thickest area in the top image is right around just north of, it's just west of that refined smaller grid area in whitewater draw. So that's the deepest area there. And then our lower image there, that's going south to north, so south is on our left side. And the deepest section in this cross section is just above our horizontal line there. So the deepest part of our basin is our kind of in the center of the basin here. Let's see, and then also just to mention, both cross sections are exaggerated 5 times just for refloating.
Actually,
It's just still not working. I think it's dying. It's turned off again.
And could you speak a little slower?
Yes, I can.
All
All right, I will get ready to slow down.
Yeah, too.
All right, next slide, please. Okay, so these slides get into the specific layering of the model. So the first slide is about the ground surface elevations. This is the top surface in our model. So this is just from a USGS 30-meter DEM, which is the digital elevation model. And we just project that information on the square created for the elevations. The next several slides, you'll see maps that are very similar to this. So I just want to go over what it is. It's showing the elevation, not the thickness, not the depth. And these darker colors you see in the middle, that's just saying that the elevation is much lower. It's deeper into or closer to the ground, and then, or closer to something like that. And then the more yellow, light green that you see on the edges is where it's higher elevation. So that's where we're getting into our mountains and part rock on the edges. So the elevation is decreasing from the east and the west to the center. So that part of the basin is generally the deepest part. And then as we go south into Mexico, it also gets a little deeper. The elevation goes down. And then I also just wanted to reiterate on these next few slides, it is very blocky. It's not going to be smooth contour lines just because we're using our model grid to display this. It's not going to be smooth lines that you see. So just look at it out there. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this one is our upper valley fill bottom. So this was that contract I was mentioning earlier, where we were using build-ups to kind of figure out where this might be. So where is the contact between our finer grain information, so sands, and our coarser grain stuff, like gravels. So this was picked from about 300 driller logs, 282. And then also we use the AZ geological surveys, surficial geology information that help kind of guide us. So like the last map, our central section of the basin is going to be the lower elevation. You can see those two kind of darker blobs in there. Those actually correspond pretty well with the deepest areas you saw in our cross sections a few slides back. So again, just to reiterate, that contact is based on changing material size. There wasn't a super defined easy way to see those two units. So we were very much looking for material hardening, people saying that it's a very hard material or, just grain size changes too, those differences. And then this map up here, the smaller one, it's just, it's the same image from a few slides ago, but just a reminder on where those logs fall. Next slide. All right, and this is our the final elevation bottom, the lower valley of the bottom. This one is just based on the AZGS, the AZ Geologic Survey bedrock contours. They modified them from the Oppenheimer and Sumner 1980 bedrock contours. AZGS modified them just a bit with some logs just to make them a little clearer. And then here for the lower elevation for the lower fill, elevation also decreases from east and west to the center. And then as it gets into Mexico a little bit. So the elevation is a little confusing here. It's anywhere from negative 4,000 to just over 5,000 feet above sea level. You can also think of that as 4,000 feet below sea level and up to 5,000 feet above that. Next slide, please. So these next few slides are related to the previous ones. The previous ones we looked at were elevations. These are going to be the thicknesses of each of these layers. So we're just going to look at the upper valley fill and the lower valley fill. These are the main units that contribute to the groundwater here, or the groundwater. So the upper valley fill is pretty thick. So around the edges in that yellow color, that's where it's the thinnest. So at thinnest, it's about 20 feet. And then as you go into the center of the basin and those darker blue spots, it gets much, much thicker. And on, around 1,500 feet thick. That's pretty thick. So there's a big range of thicknesses for layer one. Great, next slide. Okay, so this is very similar. It's the lower valley fill thickness. So this one's much thicker than our previous layer. So this one gets up to 7,000 feet thick in that center section, in that very dark little area in the center of the basin on the Arizona side. And then it gets down to 0 feet thick. In one little area, you can see at the northern boundary of our model, there's one little gray spot. We just determined that there is some higher elevation bedrock there. And so we just wanted to make sure we capture that here as well. So we don't expect water to flow in that location through the bedrock. This surface here was determined from bedrock contours from the AZGS, the Arizona Geological Survey. And so it was a fairly simple. So we didn't use faults. All right, next slide, please. Okay, our next section is going to be about our water budget. So we are just looking at the steady state water budget. So this is just when we know human activity isn't changing the groundwater storage too much. So we expect the water.
I think some people are still having more time.
Still having more time. Okay, I don't know if this is still louder.
I just feel the room.
Okay.
Is that why it actually needs to be?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
It would be really nice to be able to understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm not understanding what you're saying.
Okay, I can try to speak up a little bit more.
What if you turn?
Yeah.
What if you turn? Can you turn and talk to them?
Yeah, I can.
Because then it would enunciate. Because we could read it.
Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me a little better.
Worth the try.
I'll look here so I can keep on track. The next one, we're talking about the steady state water budget. So this is just, it's the very first part of our model. This is where we make sure we have some of our management pieces kind of figured out. So we want to make sure we have some of the opportunities and just our general storage figured out here. And that helps us calibrate the later version of the model, which is a little more complicated because it has time in it. But very simply, the steady state is just what's coming out of the groundwater system is the same as what is going in. So this little diagram I have here, just think of it as a 100-gallon bucket, and it's always going to be 100 gallons, 20 gallons go in, 20 gallons come out. And so it's always kind of around and it's in balance. So there's no change in storage in steady state. That is the only part of the water budget I will be talking about today. That is part of the process leadership. Let's see. The other thing I want to mention are just some examples of outflows and inflows. So outflows would be things like groundwater pumping, evaporative transpiration, which is where plants transpire water from the ground, and then underflow out. That's just water that moves in between different basins. And the next step that we'll be doing after we have our steady state model worked out is the transient period, which is taking time. That's where, that's a little more complicated, and that is about a little under. All right, next slide, please. Is that what you want in your free badge? That's all. Okay, I'll keep doing that. Okay, so in the slides here, I'll go in order for inflows, outflows, so what's coming into the groundwater basin, into the aquifer, and then what's coming out from the ladder. So this first section is about natural recharge. So this will be things like mountain front recharge and ephemeral recharge along washes. So those light blue colors you see on our map here, those are the ephemeral washes that we identified that had surface flow that was significant enough that we think there's some recharge happening in those channels. And then the darker blue along the edges, that's our mountain front recharge. So that's recharge that happens after precipitation events that come down the mountains and recharge near the base. We have an estimate for recharge and natural recharge of about 20,000 acre feet per year. And that's what we're estimating right now for these two events. And that is from a paper from Coats and Fish in the 1950s. Next slide, please. Okay, this inflow, this is another recharge component, but this is the agricultural recharge. So we have a lot of agriculture in Douglas. And we expect some of the water that is used to irrigate the fields to return to the aquifer as well. Next, I'll take all of it. And that is what this figure is showing. Those green boxes are just locations that are a model grid, so the big squares, where there is some kind of irrigation happening back in 1940. To determine those locations, we looked at a lot of aerial imagery over the last year to just draw out all these fields and make sure we had them in the right spots. The agricultural recharge here, we were able to figure out a little bit better. So we have an estimate for pumping, which is about just under 4,000 acre feet here. Previous studies also verify that information for us, or rather validate that information for us. So we look pretty okay with that. And then the recharge, because of the bleaching and those clay layers that I mentioned earlier, impeding some of that flow, we think only about 5% of that agricultural pumping is going back into the aquifer, or about 200 acres per year. So it's a fairly minor component. And that's what we have for the agricultural recharge. Next slide, please. All right, so the next inflow is another component of recharge. This one is fairly small, it's very small. This is industrial recharge happening in the 1940s for around mines and other industrial and commercial uses. The estimated pumping for those uses was about 1,300 acre feet per year. The related recharge is about 340 acre feet per year. So also fairly small. This one we assumed about 25% of the estimate. All right, and those pink, sorry, I was going to go to the map real quick. Those pink cells are just the locations that we have for those industrials. All right, next slide. Okay, and then the next inflow is our underflow. So this is water coming into the Douglas Basin from the Wilcox Basin, just north of us here. So this one is based on water levels and water elevations. So we looked at many hydrographs for wells in this area that we have measurements for going back to 1940. And we also had some other reference hydrographs from previous studies that also indicated the headlands. And so that GWSI is just our groundwater site inventory. That is where our field team puts their measurements that they go and take to people. So those yellow cells you see there, they go through both layers of the model. So some of them are in the upper valley fill, some will be in the lower valley fill, and those just simulate that movement from Wilcox into the place. All right, next slide, please. All right, next inflow is our stream flow. So this is just along the southern portion of Whitewater Draw. It's just south of the wildlife area or the wetland in Douglas, and it goes all the way down into Mexico where it's the model. So we wanted to model the surface water groundwater interaction here, and so we just wanted to make sure we capture that because there is some surface flow that is more or less year round near the border of Mexico. And then there's also quite a bit of vegetation in that area, which also indicates a really shallow groundwater table. And so we think that there's a good amount of connection between the two pieces here with the surface water groundwater. We want to make sure we capture that, especially as we get further south in the model towards let's see. Next slide, please. Over to that. Okay. Now we're into the outflows. So I'll be talking about pumping a little bit. This is a steady state model. We have a very small amount of pumping that was happening in the 40s. So for agriculture, we have about 62 pumping wells. The total agricultural pumping was about just under 4,000 acre feet. This is the USGS estimate. And then the pumping, since we don't know what each well is doing, is evenly distributed to all the wells. So each well that you see here, all those green dots, are pumping about 60 acre feet of water per year. And then again, it's a very small amount of pumping. So next slide, please. We also have the industrial pumping. So there's 10 pumping wells, the orange dots you see there. Most of them are related to mines in this time period. And there's about 1,300 acre feet. This was also a USGS estimate. And then this one's a little different. It's not uniformly distributed. It's based on what material mines we have been using and other historic uses at these sites. And so the pumping was distributed based on that, depending on the materials. This is also a very small amount of water. Okay. All right, next slide, please. All right, so one of the last outflows we have here is our evapotranspiration. So this one is fairly hard to quantify. So we have some estimates based on vegetation in the area. So there's a lot of cottonwood and willows in the area. We think the vegetation uptake for ET is about 1,200 millimeters per year. It's a very small number, but the model itself will kind of work out that math for us, depending on how our groundwater and surface water behaves in that area. I don't have a solid volume for that yet. Our model will help us figure out that budget item. And then ET, or evapotranspiration, is only occurring along whitewater draw, so it's more or less the same footprint as our one of the previous slides. This green line here going down, that's everywhere that we think that there's riparian vegetation, and that goes all the way down to Mexico. One of the other pieces of information we use to kind of verify or validate how our model is behaving is real-world data. One of those things is OpenET. It's a website that has that area of whitewater draw lights up very well. But the more white color you see there, is saying there's more ET in that area, and the areas surrounding the whitewater draw it's not. It doesn't have ET. All right. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
All right. So that is our update. Swap out another one.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. That's very different. Okay. Our next steps. The next piece of this current process we're in is calibrating our steady state model. So that's making sure it's behaving in a way that we expect it to based on our measurements and what we see in reality. We want to make sure that our model is behaving correctly, stays grounded in reality. And so one of the primary pieces of information that we get out of our calibration is hydraulic conductivity. That is a very hard thing to estimate, and that is a piece of information that we have a very large data gap for in the Douglas area. And so we're always open to more data. So Aquifer Test would be very welcome to help us with this data, this piece of data. But the next steps after we get the steady state calibrated is to start working on the more the time component, the transient portion of the model. So that would be developing those data sets and then also getting them into the model and then also calibrating that to make sure it's behaving correctly or realistically rather. And then we will be documenting the modeling process. So, writing our reports, making sure we have all the assumptions and everything in there. And then we'll be publishing that completed model. So this is a fairly new model. We started working on it at the end of last year, and the entire modeling process can take 3 or 4 years. So the steady state process, we're almost on a year. That's more or less expected at this point. So it's fairly lengthy. Next slide. I believe that is the last one. If you have questions or anything, you can contact us at our emails. That is me and Emily's email up there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have the Douglas AMA First Management Plan information. And Madison and Casey will update on this, and then the council will have a discussion on.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, council members, for having us again. And great job, Sarah. That was a really awesome presentation. I appreciate that. So today, Madison and I are here to talk about the informal draft of the first Douglas AMA management plan. It is now available on the website for you to view and download. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. Next slide, please, Nick. So with every AMA, a management plan must be established within 2 years of the designation. The Douglas AMA designation was on December 1st, 2022. So our tentative promulgation of the initial management plan is going to be December 1st, 2024. Again, promulgation meaning a formal adoption of the management plan after approval and having hearings and such. The tentative effective date for conservation requirements will be January 1st, 2027. That is to give folks some time to get everything in line and get ready to comply with those conservation requirements. Next slide, please, Nick. So today we're going to be going through the entire management plan as it's laid out online. Hydrology, supply and demand, recharge, agricultural, municipal, industrial, implementation and compliance, and finally, water strategy. As I have mentioned, the informal draft is posted online for you to check out, and we are accepting comments on that draft until September 9th, when we will then take those comments into consideration, make any changes that need to be made. And we look forward to all of your comments and encourage them. Next slide, please. All right. So the Groundwater Management Act was established in 1980, and that established the Department of Water Resources. It also put into place the original AMAs and the original INAs. It also gave us the authority to create additional AMAs and INAs as they come about. So the Act established management plans for each AMA, which established conservation measures to help curb the withdrawal of groundwater in each one of the active management areas. With the creation of the Douglas AMA, a management plan is of course required. Throughout the process, we've had multiple public meetings, about 8 as far as I'm aware, and we were able to craft a management plan that considered the unique needs of the Douglas stakeholders, taking into account all the comments that we received throughout that process and those brainstorming sessions. The management goal states that the management goal of the Douglas AMA is to support the general economy and welfare of the users in the basin by reducing the rate of aquifer depletion by an amount established in the first management plan and by additional reductions established in each subsequent management plan every 10 years thereafter. Next slide, thanks. So given the goal, what we are establishing in this draft management plan is we're aiming to decrease the rate of aquifer overdraft by 340 acre feet per year, or a total of 3,400 acre feet over 10 years. That takes into account inflows, outflows, natural recharge, withdrawals, etc. And we will be working towards that goal thanks to the conservation programs that are laid out in chapters 4, 5, and 6, which Madison will be going over. Next slide, please. All right, so Sarah gave a pretty great kind of overview into just the groundwater modeling and hydrology in general. The hydrology chapter within this management plan covers general climate data for the basin, different sediments that the aquifer is made of, and more information on land subsidence, land subsidence, which happens when too much water is taken out of the aquifer and the ground itself begins to shrink. So that is something that we are trying to manage with our management plan. Next slide, please. All right. So agriculture accounts for 87% of demand in the Douglas AMA, with more than 18,000 acres currently in cultivation by measure of the supply and demand report published in December 2023. Douglas AMA is predominantly dependent on groundwater. The aquifer itself is a basin fill alluvium, with the upper portion of the basin consisting of gravel, sand, and silt, and the deeper portion of the basin consisting of conglomerate, gravel, and sand. After completing a baseline analysis from 1990 to 2002, the department estimates that there is an insufficient annual supply to meet annual demand. And analysis results show that a negative balance of supply and demand exists every year, meaning that more water is leaving the basin than enters. And if you look at that chart up there, you'll see in the last 17 years, the aquifer has gone down almost a million acre feet. So lots of loss there. Next slide, please. The recharge and recovery chapter talks about the ability for folks down here in the basin to store excess renewable water supplies, so non-groundwater supplies, for future use, with the intent to replenish the aquifer pursuant to the Underground Water Storage, Savings, and Replenishment Act. So currently there are none of those existing permitted recharge facilities here in the basin, but if that's something that somebody is interested in, they can go ahead and contact the department, and the recharge department can help you with that. I'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Madison for the real important meat and potatoes of this presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Madison Moreno. I am the AMA Establishment Coordinator. I will be going over kind of the second half of the management plan and the more meat and potatoes of the plan, establishing the conservation programs for each section. First, we'll go over the agricultural conservation program. It is required of all irrigation grandfathered right holders. You'll hear me say IGFR. That's what I mean by that. Irrigation is kind of the main point of that, as irrigation means for us irrigating 2 or more acres for the use of crops or to produce crops for human or animal consumption. Each IGFR owner is regulated under the base program, as all they are, unless they submit an application to be under the integrated farm program and it is approved by the department. Next slide, please. The base program, it is allotment-based program. It utilizes crop consumptive use, irrigation efficiencies, and acreage to determine an annual allotment. There's a slight typo on this first equation where it says assigned irrigation efficiency irrigation. Take off the second irrigation. We caught it kind of last minute, thanks. So irrigation water duty is the total irrigation requirements, which is the crop consumptive use, irrigation efficiencies, per acre divided by the assigned irrigation efficiency. So we take, and a water duty is the amount of in acre feet per acre that is reasonable to apply to irrigated land. And water duty acres are the highest number of acres irrigated at one time or at 1 year between August 30th, 2017 through August 30th, 2022. So we'll take the highest amount of acres irrigated during that 5-year historical period and multiply it by the water duty of the crops being grown to create an allotment based off the acreage. Each IGFR will, in the base program, will have a flexibility account. This flexibility account can be kind of understood as a rainy day fund. Think of it as a bank account where if you don't use all of your allotted allotment that year, because it was a pretty rainy year, you'll have that extra in that flexibility account. And let's say the next year was a pretty hot year, we used a little bit more water than our allotment accounted for. That helps you stay in compliance with the department over time, because we understand weather happens. Next slide, please. I'll be going into crop consumptive use a little bit. So the department calculated crop consumptive use numbers for the determination of these allotments. We used the Blaney-Criddle method that used temperature, daylight hours, evapotranspiration, growing seasons, and crop coefficients to determine how much water a specific crop needs to produce in a single year. ADWR also considered available crop data from the USGS and reported data that we received in our INA reports over time in the development of these numbers. Next slide, please. This component of the base program allotment calculation is new for any AMA. We have decided to create a tiered system of irrigation efficiencies. So based off of the acreage of the applicant and the farm unit, it will be set an irrigation efficiency of a range of 80 to 85. So 80, 83, 85, based off of how large the farm is. Next slide, please. The second program in the agricultural conservation chapter is the integrated farm program. We had lots of public information and kind of guidance to include this program in the management plan. It is an alternative program that allows the owner/operator of the IGFRs to combine the allotments and apply that water anywhere within the combined footprint of the IGFRs. With that combined allotment, there will be a 5% cut of that total allotments combined to the aquifer. It also allows those owners/operators to combine their annual reports and only submit one, whereas people could be submitting 3 or 4. They're tedious, so it helps release that burden on the operator and owner. Next slide, please. Next, we'll go into the municipal conservation program. We have in the municipal conservation program, large providers and small providers. Large providers serve more than 250 acre feet annually to customers, and small providers serve less than 250 acre feet annually. Large providers have to comply with the Integrated Water Resource Plan, which is new to any AMA and very unique to Douglas, and have to commit to a lost and unaccounted for water requirement. Small municipal providers are required to minimize waste of all water supplies, maximize efficiency, encourage reuse, and improve water use efficiencies. They also have a lost and unaccounted for water requirement. Next slide, please. All municipal providers must limit the total amount of lost and unaccounted for water in their distribution system. Large providers have no more than 10% of total quantity of water, and small providers no more than 15%. So we take the difference between potable supply and the deliveries to customers. That's your lost and unaccounted for water percentage. That's calculated annually with the annual reports that are submitted to the department. We also take a consideration of annual lost and unaccounted for and a 3-year average to stay in compliance or out of compliance with that. Next slide, please. The Integrated Water Resource Plan is a scenario planning program that is designed to increase water use efficiencies, promote reuse, reduce withdrawals of groundwater while anticipating potential changes and challenges. We are designing this program to be more of a timeline program where we stay in contact with these large providers and understand the challenges and needs of a growing community. And we ask that these plans are kept on file with the department, and if there are any changes, that those changes be documented with us. And we're just looking at potential challenges and changes over time because we understand that growth happens and things change. Next slide, please. Individual user requirements are any Individual user is a person who receives water from a municipal provider for non-irrigation use. So for example, we could think a city golf course would be an individual user. They do have to notify the department of their individual user status, and they are responsible for their own conservation requirements and compliance status. So the city wouldn't be responsible if they were out of compliance. It would be the golf course itself for that example. Next slide, please. The Industrial Conservation Program is a doozy. This one's going to be long. Bear with me. It is all non-irrigation use. So kind of whatever doesn't fall within municipal and within agricultural is what falls into the industrial program. An industrial user is a person who uses groundwater withdrawn pursuant to a type 1 or a type 2 non-irrigation grandfathered right, or a withdrawal permit for an industrial use. The biggest thing here is that all industrial users, regardless of what they classify as, are required to submit a conservation plan with the department. Next slide, please. I'll be going over each of the different types of industrial facilities that we have at the department and that are in the management plan. So they're kind of more overarching what they are rather than going in depth what's in the management plan. There are turf-related facilities. This includes schools, cemeteries, golf courses, common areas within housing subdivisions that are 10 or more acre feet of intense water or water-intense landscaping. Water-intense landscaping means grass, just for reference. There is a base allotment that is calculated based off of a total acreage of turf, low water use landscaped areas, water surface areas, think lakes or anything like that, and an application rate of acre foot per acre. So, and there are different application rates between golf courses and non-golf courses. Next slide, please. Sand and gravel facilities, they are regulated facilities that use more than 10 acre feet of water in a calendar year. They also, in addition to the conservation plan, they must include 2 additional best management practices that are listed out in the management plan and submit that to the department. Next. Power plants. These are steam electrical plants, combustion turbine plants, and combined cycle plants. They also must submit a conservation plan outlining the water management practices and technologies the facility is using and will use in the future to maximize water use efficiencies. Next, please. Cooling facilities. Cooling towers' purpose is to cool water that has absorbed the heat of a heat generating process. They are defined as a facility that has a minimum cooling capacity of 1,000 tons. They are responsible for submitting a conservation plan of ways to maximize their water use efficiencies. Next, please. Dairy facilities. Dairy operations that are regulated as a dairy facility is they annually house a monthly average of 100 or more lactating cows per day. They also are an allotment-based program where we take the amount of head of cattle lactating and non-lactating cattle, and base their allotment off of that. They also must submit a conservation plan that outlines measures for maximum water use efficiency. Feedlot facilities. They are facilities that operate that have a annually house and feed an average of 100 more beef cattle per day. Allotment-based requirements, so same thing as kind of the dairy, we take however many head of cattle that you have on the feedlot property and based an allotment off of that. And they also must submit a conservation plan that outlines measures for maximum water use efficiencies. Next, please. Mining program. So the mining program has facilities that mine and process ores or use or have the potential to use more than 500 acre feet of water per year. They have a long-range conservation plan because mining takes a little bit more time than we think. So we account for a longer time period of their conservation plan and also need to minimize water use to the extent that's practical. Because there are some other certain areas where they may need to use a little bit more water for EPA standards and things like that for contamination. So we understand that there are other things that we need to comply with. So the conservation plan is more long range on that side. Next slide. We have a new category in the industrial program. It is a new large industrial or commercial user program. New large industrial commercial users in the first management plan are industrial users that use over 100 acre feet per year and have commenced use after January 1st, 2027. They must submit a conservation plan with the department. Next slide, please. We will go into the next chapter of implementation and compliance. The biggest thing to notice here is we have a couple processes called admin reviews and variances. These recognize that certain individual conservation requirements may pose hardships and may not be attainable in that timeline or at all. These processes will allow relief in some situations for certain ideas where we are trying to get into compliance. We understand that some things take time, money, and effort. So we want to be able to work along with you and create an adjustment for those conservation programs. Next slide, please. The last chapter of the management plan is the water strategies chapter. It is a big picture chapter. We're looking at the beginning paths of the future of reducing withdrawals of groundwater and the potential growth and prosperity of the basin for years to come. We're looking at tools that may be possible to use in the future or something that we can start brainstorming and thinking about in a big picture way of what needs to happen and what can happen for the basin. It has, with the evolution of the management periods and public input, is going to be key to development of future plans and future states of the basin. We're really emphasizing in this chapter that public input has been really important, and we've been really grateful for everyone's input and appreciate everyone's time with this. And I think that's it. Next one. Yeah, we will call one reminder actually before I call to the council. Additional comments will be accepted through September 9th. So any comments that you may have, you may submit them to the management plan's email above, or you can send them directly to my email. Council, you all have my email. Either way works. And thank you for your time, and I will call to the council.
Thank you, Madison. Thank you, Madison and Casey. Now it's the time for the council to discuss this. We will have a call to the public at the end of the meeting. That's agenda item number 7. And we're at item number 4. So I know there's people that want to talk to the call to the public, but that will be after, at the end of the meeting. So this time is open to the council members. If you guys have any specific questions, I suggest that we go chapter by chapter. If you have any comments on that or questions on those chapters, instead of everyone bouncing back and forth. If you have the list of questions you have and the page numbers. So the first one I have is on page 22. If you have the management plan, it's on the supply and demand. Judy. I do have a question on table number 2, Madison, on table number 2. It has the stream flow infiltration, 1990 was 338, 2005 over 3,000, and then 2022 59. That just doesn't seem correct. But if you can just look in that, or unless you have an explanation.
I do not have an explanation. I will get back to you on that. I will discuss this with our supply and demand team. Thank you.
On page 24, you had under cattle, you had that there was 1,000, just over 1,000 grazing cattle in the basin, and that's incorrect. That's very low. Maybe 3,000 to 4,000 cows in the basin.
Thank you.
And some of that you probably should be able to get that from the Arizona Department of Ag. Because they're supposed to be reporting what they have. So you could use the Department of Ag to get that corrected.
Thank you.
Anyone else has any in these? Speak up. Now we're on chapter 4 for agriculture. And we do have comments on this one. Yeah. On page 42, you're talking about the irrigation, the allotment that you get is based on 5 years. But if you have a young orchard and it's only been in the ground for 3 years, and they don't mature till they're 7 or 10 years old. So what would the allotment be on a young orchard? Would it be the water use that would be for a mature orchard just because it was just planted in the last 5 or 10 years?
I'm not quite sure at that time. It's based on mature plants.
Mature
actually.
plants?
Yes.
Okay.
Great question.
And then I did get it clarified that, on the allotment, so on the allotment, when the INA went through, a lot of it was flood irrigating. So flood irrigating was 160 acres, then you'd put a pivot on it, and under a pivot's about 120 acres. So under the INA, we could have always flood irrigated, or you could have always irrigated the 160 acres, but now the AMA is taking the footprint of what is being irrigated today. So that footprint is 120 acres. But in the future, 10 or 20 years, if there was something else that wanted to be planted there, not use a pivot because you could get more water efficiency with drip irrigation. My understanding is that you can still irrigate that 120 acres, but you can make it a rectangle and go outside of the footprint, but still keep the same amount of irrigated acres.
This is already on. Thank you for that question. My name is Natalie Mast. I think you all know me. I'm the Active Management Area Director. Thank you to the team for the wonderful presentation, and it's a very good question, Jackie. So you're very close to correct on that. So the AMA redefines the boundaries of what is legally irrigable. So you're talking about the circle being your legally irrigable acreage. That's 120 acres. That footprint, that defined circle, that polygon, if you will, is what is able to be defined or to be irrigated. Excuse me, I'm going to start that over because I misspoke. That circle is the physical footprint of what is legally allowed to be irrigated. If, for example, you were switching from a center pivot to drip irrigation, and drip irrigation works better in rectangles instead of circles, you could apply to the department for what is called I'm struggling with
Substitution.
speaking today, excuse me. You could apply to the department for what's called a substitution. So it's not something where you could just choose to do that and make it happen. You would need to go through an application process and get approval to change that footprint. Does that make sense?
So what I'm hearing you say is, under the INA, on the example Jackie had, a person was assigned 120 or 160 acres under the INA, and under the AMA, if it currently has a pivot on it, they're going to lose 40 acres of irrigation, right?
So the number of acres that is eligible for continued irrigation under the AMA requirements is the number of acres legally irrigated in the 5 years prior to the call for the election. So it could be a lower number of acres than was previously allowed to be irrigated under the INA. That's correct.
And if because there's some property out there that wasn't irrigated in the preceding 5 years from the call to the election, which is, I think, August of 2022. So those acres, that acreage cannot be, someone can't go out and put a pivot up on a parcel that wasn't irrigated prior to August 2022, unless there's substantial cost that was done around that time frame, not 2 years later.
That's correct. If there wasn't any irrigation done between August 2022 and August of 2017, they wouldn't be able to put something up after that unless there's, of course, like you said, substantial capital investment into that.
Yeah, so there's because there is some places that, but there's substantial capital investment. And I'm getting off into the weeds there, but because, if you're an orchard for an orchard, you have to buy your trees 2 years before. So if you had 100 acres that you wanted to put into trees, you would have bought those trees like January. You would have had to send them a check in January of 2022, and you wouldn't really plant them until February or March in 2023 because it takes a whole year to get those trees. So that potentially could qualify then for a substantial capital investment because you'd already bought the trees and you knew what you were going to do.
Every substantial capital investment application and case is very case by case specific.
That would be specific, right, to them, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now I guess my question, I'm trying to understand. So what you're talking about is reference of grandfathered rights. Whatever is wet, you're maintaining. What were you alluding to in terms of this new process you would have to apply for? Because that kind of got me confused. It almost sounded like you're saying you could do the trade acreage as long as your water footprint was the same. So could you clarify, please?
So when we issue an irrigation grandfathered right, there is a defined footprint of legally irrigated acres within that right.
Right.
So if Jackie, for example, was issued 120 acres in the shape of a circle, she can only apply water to that 120 acres in the shape of a circle. We do have a process, however, that's enabled by statute that allows for the substitution of legally irrigable acres in cases where that substitution would allow for more efficient irrigation. So there is an application process for that where you could request to the department that we consider changing that, in the example we're talking about, changing that circle to a rectangle to enable drip irrigation, for example. You could request consideration of
But
that.
still it would still be 120 acres.
It would still be 120 acres,
Gotcha.
correct.
Yeah, you can't change the footprint acreage.
Right. You can't change the total amount of acreage. You can't increase that total amount of acreage, but there are some limited cases where you might be able to change the shape of it, for example.
Or the controversy, if you had some kind of blocky L-looking thing in the acreage to put a pivot on it, you could essentially apply for that and then make it a pivot if the acreage was the same.
You could apply for it and we would consider it under the statute.
Gotcha.
Now I'm on page 55 under the crop usage.
Can we go back a few pages?
All the public's at the end.
I'm on page 48. And I was reading through section 7, it refers to a subsection X, which I could not find. And
Thank you for catching my typo. I guess I will fix that. Thank you. I have that highlighted.
And then on item B, criteria for approval of application. Again, it says A1 through A7, and I couldn't find A7 anywhere in the text.
Oh, yes, I see. Okay, thank you.
And may I go on to page 49?
Yes.
In, well, the item. Under item 2 there on that page 49 by the top. The way that reads, I understand that as saying, we go through all this process and get it set up, and the director of the Department of Resources can change anything he wants anytime he wants. So my question is the director governed by the 45 statute? Maybe I misread it. Maybe I'm.
So it's a really good question. I understand. I think I understand the question, and correct me if I go the wrong direction here.
Well, I probably went the wrong direction.
So there are specific statutes that lay out a structure for flexibility accounts for irrigation grandfathered rights. So there are specific statutory requirements there. However, those statutes also require that the department adopt rules to provide some additional specifics in exactly how those accounts are going to be administered and kind of some of the logistics there, right? So that's really what that's referencing, is the fact that we have both a statutory structure and a rules structure, but the rules are really just to add some additional detail to the statute and explain how it is that we are going to administer that statutory structure. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, it alluded to it for sure.
Okay.
And those rules are in their administrative code.
Those rules are in the administrative code.
Administrative code,
Yes.
but the director is still bound by the statutes, and
Correct.
if any real changes other than the rules, he's got to go through the legislature.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Because you have the ARS, the statutes, and the administrative code that governs what ADWR does.
Thank you, Jackie.
All right, I got a question here. One specific question, and then just kind of wanting, it would be great for you to clarify. So it's on the consumptive water use and other needs by crops. So you said that data someone said it was taken from a specific something or other. Could you explain that? Because I definitely have heard there's a couple numbers on here that kind of seem, page 55 we're looking at.
Yeah, on your slide you had that you got it from USGS. I'm just curious why you didn't get USDA.
So there's kind of a little bit more to it than just that. So we gathered information based off of weather data from the station here of daylight hours, temperature, which was needed to use for the Blaney-Criddle method that we have used across all AMAs. So that method establishes those components. We used that to create evapotranspiration rates, then using USGS crop coefficients. So we used USGS data that they supplied, and also taking into consideration actual water use data that was reported through the INA reports of historical usage based off of the certain crops that were reported.
And so just want to clarify, because this corn is listed at 2 acre feet. That's not a typo.
No.
That's extremely low.
Yeah. It's
That
very
is
low.
a consumptive use factor, so it is a component of the larger picture, kind of what we're talking about. So it will be multiplied by the irrigation efficiency of, divided by the irrigation use efficiency, then it would be multiplied by the acreage to create that annual allotment.
If you are able to supply us some specific information or a source that might point us to a if we're able to find some additional data sources or that type of thing, we can certainly consider adjustments to that ahead of publishing a formal draft of this for the hearing.
Yeah, because I think some of them might be a little high, but U of A has done a lot of water consumption for plants, and that corn is not correct.
And we're certainly open to looking into additional data. If there's anything you can send our way, I would certainly appreciate that.
So the process would be us up here giving it to you.
Anybody
Anyone?
And
Or
anybody can submit that information.
public could do so as well.
Yes.
By September 9th.
By
All comments
okay.
are due September 9th in writing to ADWR, and just cite the location where you're getting the other information.
Correct.
Okay, so the last part of that, I don't know if we're able to do this, but I get super confused by that formula. And it would be great if you just took any one of these crops and did that just to give a theoretical, like, okay, this person grows this, and what does that actually mean? Because I get asked that all the time, and I'm like, I have no idea. And it'd actually be great to have a concrete piece to show people. So I don't know if we have the time, or possibly Chair.
Madison, could you take alfalfa and just tell us what it would
Yes,
be then?
yes.
If you brought your calculator. Or your phone.
And what page is that formula on?
So the way you would get to an application rate from the consumptive use is by dividing consumptive use by your irrigation efficiency. So what I did just now on my phone calculator was 4.67, which is the listed consumptive use that we have for alfalfa, divided by 0.83, which is our midpoint in kind of that range of irrigation efficiencies that we talked about. So 4.67 divided by 0.83 comes out to 5.6 acre feet per acre. That would then be multiplied by the water duty acres to create an allotment for the entire IGFR. And something that is important to note about that allotment for the IGFR is that it's not prescriptive on an acre by acre basis. That allotment can be used kind of as you see fit within that footprint of the IGFR.
Right. If someone had alfalfa corn in an orchard and they wanted to put more of that water to the orchard, they could do that and put in a different type of plant than alfalfa.
Right. So by using less on one portion, you could use more on one portion,
So
a different portion.
Alfalfa is actually then 5.6 acre feet.
Right. Once you take into account that irrigation efficiency. Okay. That's correct.
And then that last part you multiply, that's based on your historic usage?
That's based on what would be issued as a part of the IGFR. So there are two acreage values that are issued as a part of an IGFR. One is the irrigation acres, which is the footprint of any of the acres that were irrigated at any time in that 5-year use history that we've talked about. And the water duty acres is the highest number of acres that was irrigated in any single year during that 5-year history. So those two numbers might be the same, but the water duty acres might be a little bit lower. So we use water duty acres times the water duty to calculate the total allotment for the IGFR.
Okay.
Jackie, I had a couple of questions on municipal. I don't know if we're there yet. So
I think, well, we're going to get there right after this.
I just have one more under agriculture, if you don't mind. I talked to you about this earlier, Madison, on 45, 467 in the statutes, item G,
Can you tell me which page you're referring to in the management plan? Real
Oh,
quick?
gosh. I didn't write the page number down with you. Did I
Sorry.
read through? It would be on page 43 is flexible credit accounts, ARS 45467.
$467 up at the top. Is that
Yep.
correct?
It just, when I read through that and you go through different items in it, the item H, which is obvious below G, G is sunsetted on December 31st, 1999. Does that apply then to the other sections below it or not?
So as far as, yeah, so I'm Anthony Morano, counsel with the Department of Water Resources. Obviously, the subsequent AMA that we're dealing with here is a brand new thing. And that's not necessarily accounted for in every single statute that we're going by. But we did do our best to stick as closely to those statutes as we could, taking definitely any programs that were already in statute that we know have been proven to work. And we've adopted those, again, as closely as we can, taking into account that this is a subsequent AMA to follow by those.
Okay, so the sunset date on item G under 467 is a suggestion, not a legal standing.
I will tentatively say yes.
Okay, that's good enough for me. I just trying to figure that out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, then we're on chapter 5, municipal programs.
Yeah, so about individual users and gave the example of a golf course. On page 59, 5.9.1, the wording there says an individual user is a person who receives water from a municipal provider for non-irrigation use. Either the individual user or the municipal provider serving the individual user is responsible for complying with the individual user requirements. It's a little bit confusing. It does refer you to chapter 6, which I did try to read through, and I was also confused by chapter 6. So I guess my question is, going through a couple of scenarios, you suggested that, for example, the municipal golf course should apply for their own water rights, or how does that work? So if the golf course, for example, has an allotment of water to use, and let's say they overuse it, who gets the letter on that? Who files the report on that? I'm just unclear as to, would the city report that they're out of compliance, or would you report to them that they're out of compliance? Could you kind of go through how that works?
Yes. So with individual user requirements, if let's say the city and the golf course both notify the department that they are requesting that the golf course is the individual user, thus being responsible for their own conservation measures and compliance. If that golf course is regulated as a turf facility, which it would be separate of a water right, because they're receiving water from the city, so they're a customer of the city. They don't have their own well, let's say, just hypothetically, don't have their own well to be pumping their own water, and they don't have their own water source. They're receiving water, they would just be a turf facility as an individual user. They would be responsible for reporting their water use to the department with their own specific facility number and process. And the city would not be responsible for that reporting. You would not even be notified of their reporting. If to say like, hey, it's reporting time of the year, you wouldn't be notified that that's something that you would have to be doing. Then if they go over their allotment, they would be responsible for being out of compliance. and having to get back into compliance.
Okay, and so that goes into some of the individual users you have listed, for example, are schools. So they also receive water from the city. Would you be informing them that they have a water allowance?
Yes, they would be notified that they are a facility.
But are they aware of that? I guess what I'm saying, because they're our customer. They're a subsector of the state. Is someone telling them that they're required to file for water rights?
So they wouldn't be filing for water rights. They would just be notified that they would be a facility based off of.
Who tells them they have to file as a facility?
So the industrial program can be a little bit confusing here. So maybe I can back up a little bit to help out. In our industrial program, it's a little bit different than the municipal side of things, and it's different than the agricultural side of things in the sense that the conservation requirements are not tied to the water right. They're two very separate things. So on the municipal side, you have your service area right, and that is really tied to your conservation requirements as a municipal service provider. On the agricultural side, you have your IGFR, and that's really tied to what your conservation requirements and your allotment are, right? On the industrial side, you can obtain a water right in many different ways. And depending on how you use that water right, you might have additional conservation requirements and volumetric limits or reporting requirements that apply. So it's a little bit disconnected in a way that the other sectors aren't, and it can be really confusing. So in the case of an individual user, that individual user is receiving groundwater actually pursuant to the service area right, not pursuant to their own groundwater right. But if the city or the user so chooses, they can also be responsible for their own reporting on those additional conservation requirements. So again, the method by which they receive water and the conservation requirements are a little bit disconnected on that industrial user side. Does that help?
It helps some. So for example, the school, are you going to be notifying the school districts that they have to conserve water and they have to do reporting?
So anyone that has conservation requirements under the management plan would receive a notice of those conservation requirements, yes.
From you?
Yes.
Okay.
And on that, it was if they're irrigating turf more than 10 acres, is that cumulative for the school district, cumulative for one site? You know, you have baseball fields.
It's for
football
one
fields.
site.
It's for the site. And then cemeteries like Bisbee, you know, the cemetery there is more than 10 acres.
There's no water.
There's no water.
The cemetery in Bisbee used to be supplied by Phelps Dodge, and that ended. And so the lines aren't even in. The only people that have water are the Serbian section, I believe, and there might be one other, and it's privately paid for. So there's absolutely none. We actually have started a program of transporting water from the wastewater, and we have holding tanks that we're going to start irrigating off of the holding tanks in the winter and such. So yeah.
Jackie, I have one additional question, and this is about, again, with the individual users hauled water. So we get requests to have meters off of our hydrants. People haul water to their ranches and to other places. This has been a practice that's gone on many, many years. A lot of people whose wells have run dry and also for construction purposes request a meter, and they want water to haul back to their ranches or for whatever use that they have. What is applicable in that situation?
For hauling and wheeling water purposes, that would be reported on the annual report. We can talk about that more in depth later when it comes down to it.
Just one thing before we move on. We've also visual. People at home are still able to see the slides on Heroes, but they might be able to see the camera. So when it's on, please make sure to identify yourself. And that person here is going to have to get. It looks like the cable might have got kicked right in front of you, Mr. Chairman. So we're going to have to get in there to fix the camera.
Yeah.
Sorry about this, folks.
Thanks, Nick. Jackie, goodness, Elise, sorry, excuse me. Words are hard today, apparently. I apologize. What we can do is follow up with you individually on that. There is some nuance to hauling in particular, and so we want to make sure that we're getting the details right there with you, but we can take that offline.
Okay, thank you very much.
This is Jackie. For construction water, for road construction and new development, they could go to a farmer and get construction water. Now they have so if you have a non-exempt well that's doing over 35 gallons a minute, the construction water would have to have a separate withdrawal authority than the farm water, correct?
Yes. Yes, because that farmer has a well that is an irrigation well. If that's the classification of using it for irrigation, it cannot be used for non-irrigation purposes. And that IGFR doesn't allow for that to be used for non-irrigation purposes.
And then back to one agriculture question, a feedlot. So the allotment is around 15 gallons per cow a day. But if the well is an exempt well, if it only pulls less than 35 gallons a minute, do they still have to report on that feedlot if it's over 100 cows and it's coming from if it's coming from an exempt well?
So it's a good question. There is some nuance to the exempt well definition. It's not, we often use 30, a little bit of shorthand, but there's more to it than that. So the three criteria for an exempt well is that it's 35 gallons per minute or less, is not irrigating 2 or more acres of land, and is not using more than 10 acre feet of water for a non-irrigation use. So if they are exceeding that 10 acre feet mark, which a 35 gallon per minute well could do, then they would need to have a groundwater right, a grandfathered right, and they would be subject to conservation requirements under the management plan.
So if they don't pull over 10 acre feet a year, then they don't have
Then
to.
it can be an exempt well. But if they are pulling over 10 acre feet per year, we would need to make sure that it's reclassified as a non-exempt well. And in order to use that volume of water, they would need to have a grandfathered right.
So how does an exempt well know if they're using 10 acre feet a year if they're not monitoring if they're not monitoring the discharge, counting the number of cows?
They could count a number of cows.
Yeah, but then it depends on whether they're calves, yearlings, dairy cows, or feeder cows. It gets.
They would. And they could, they'll be able to calculate that.
Okay.
How many. And then on page.
Well, will DWR accept those calculations?
Well,
we do have specific methods that we accept for estimated water uses. Yes.
Thank you.
On page 57, when it's talking about municipal, and it's talking about a large water user and a small water user, and in the small water user, it's 250 acre feet or less. But on the small water user, it doesn't define if it's 15 house connections or not. I mean, it's just a small water. If someone has a well and they're taking water from the well and they're putting in a distribution system and they have water meters on those lines, then they would be a small water user.
Yes, if they are providing water to customers under that 250 acre feet. So it could be 10 to,
it could be 5.
It could be 5. It could be however much to provide water for that municipal purpose.
Okay, so then they would be and they have to report to ADWR.
Yes.
So that begs the question, at what point do I become a water company if I'm providing water to 10 houses or 2 houses that I don't?
Selling the water, do you have a water meter on those lines and you're selling the water to them?
Is that the dichotomy?
We have a detailed substantive policy on ADWR's website that details the qualifications and process by which someone might obtain a service area right in an AMA. So I don't want to try to quote that off the top of my head, but I would refer to that for the answer to that question.
Thank you.
So then they have to come and get a service area right? Is that
Correct.
through you?
Yes, there's an application
Then
process
it would
for
be
that.
also the Corporation Commission, possibly? Or is that when it comes to the 15 House Connects?
That is for, oh goodness. So that is at that 15 connections or 25 year-round residents. And if it's not a public utility, so it's for private water companies that are above that 15 connection or 25 year-round resident threshold.
That's a Corporation Commission.
That's where it goes to the Corporation
Separate than
Commission.
ADWR. Okay.
So I have a question. It's on municipality, I suppose. How is this going to affect things like swimming pools and splash pads? Because there's 2 of one in the city of Douglas, in the municipality. And one of them is a very large, Douglas, sorry, Douglas. They have the very large pool that's on 8th Street. And then there's the one on 15th Street. And then you have a small splash pad. So how is that going to be affected by this? Sorry.
So those could just be deliveries that are regulated under a service area right, for example, where the municipal provider has conservation requirements that they are required to comply with. It kind of depends on the exact structure or if there's any other uses in that facility that would have additional conservation requirements applied to them. So there's a little bit of nuance to that question, but most often you'll see those types of uses kind of just covered under the service area right and covered under the municipal provider's conservation requirements.
Thank you.
And then for clarification, anything else? Did you have anything else? Aaron? Ron?
No.
And then on the applications for the IGRFs, ADWR sent out letters with the 79 number application number. So if there's anyone online or here that did not get a letter from ADWR, they can call the ADWR helpline at 602-771-8585 and ask to get their so the number will start 79, and that's the application number, to make sure that they have their application number in and they can find that application number. So
Yes.
that was sent out to all the applicants. So if you don't have it,
We are in the middle of,
we're still sending them out.
we're still sending them
Oh,
out.
okay. That's why I don't have one. Okay.
We are still sending out those 79 application numbers out to all the applicants. It's a process, so please bear with us on it. But please, if you have any questions about the applications, give us a call or send an email to us. We can definitely check in on those.
I think that's all the questions that we have for the draft plan. Now, item number 5, the Deputy Director report. Ryan? Oh.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman, council members, and members of the public. I am Ryan Melson, the Deputy AMA Director here at the agency. I'd like to take this opportunity to provide you with 2 updates on recent developments here at ADWR. First, in terms of personnel, I'm pleased to announce that Melissa Sykes has been promoted from our WMAP grant coordinator to our AMA Conservation Program Supervisor. Melissa has been with the agency for over 5 years and has consistently delivered outstanding work, so we're thrilled to see her step into this new role. The other is regarding alternative pathway to designation, or called ADAWS. ADWR has initiated a formal rulemaking process to modify the assured water supply rules to create an alternative pathway to designation in the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs. There's a public stakeholder process as a part of that rulemaking, including a public hearing and comment period and consideration of the rulemaking by the Governor's Regulatory Review Council. So information regarding this rulemaking and timeline are available on the ADWR's website. Those are the updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Call to the council. Does the council want any additional items put for the agenda at the next meeting? To add any items to the next agenda? Because we need to let staff know exactly what we want on the agenda. If we want items, we can still get it to you, right, Nicholas, before the next meeting? That we need to specifically tell you what we want on the agenda then. Or we can.
Meetings, I'll usually call the chair and ask if they would like to see if there's anyone on the council who had anything they'd like to share. They can speak to the chair and have her contact me. I can reach out to all of you. But my door is always open. Those kind of agenda items.
Thank you. Now it is time to call to the public. If there is any public that want to talk, please state your name and give your address, and we will take what's in the room here first. And then if there's anyone online, Nicholas will handle.
There was a question that
There's a question.
Joan Dahmer. And is considering anything she'd like to speak to for you yourself. What her question was, how will you enforce direct claims? We had a question online from Joan Dahmer. The question was, how will you enforce separate claims for the same?
So if we have multiple applicants who are claiming ownership of the same well, we do have a process to research ownership through the county on different parcels and that type of thing. It's nuanced, so I don't necessarily have a super detailed answer. Casey, I don't know if you want to add detail to that, but there is a process by which we investigate ownership and that sort of thing for applications.
I would also say during the 180-day objection period after the application deadline, that if you notice that somebody is claiming a well that you believe is yours or somebody else's and you're sure of that, definitely make some sort of objection and we will investigate that thoroughly.
For the goal of public, of those present, you can do this by raising hands, microphones, just make sure to identify yourself. For those online, please feel free to put your question in the chat box or post it in the Indian.
Andrew White with Whitewater Farms in Elfrida. What is the timeline for allotment specifics based on acreage of individual farmers, corporate farmers? For family farms, it's concerning because we carry a lot of debt and that impacts the future, what we're trying to plan for. So just, is that the end of the year?
Hi, Madison Moreno. The timeline to receive those allotments you'll receive them when there is an application approval process, which would probably closely be at the earliest April. Because once the deadline passes on September 3rd, we have a 180-day objection period once that registry has been posted. So after that, that's when we'll be granting those irrigation rights, and the allotments will be posted with that.
So something I want to emphasize with what Madison said, this is Natalie Mast. The September 3rd deadline is a hard deadline. I know we've made this point 100 times before. You've all heard me say this. I'm sure you've heard Madison and Casey say this, but we really want to take every opportunity we can to emphasize that September 3rd deadline is a hard deadline. And after that deadline, anyone who has not applied for a grandfathered right is deemed to have waived and relinquished the right to use groundwater pursuant to a grandfathered right in the AMA. So really important deadline. Please make sure your friends and neighbors know about that. After that September 3rd deadline, there is a 180-day objection period. So it won't be until after that objection period that we will actually start issuing rights.
I have a second question too. I think it's obvious that there is no more expansion as far as irrigated land. in this draft, there was significant amount of pages to dairy and how much water that dairy gets to use. There isn't a dairy in the AMA that has over 100 cows. The Golden Rule dairy, I believe, is less. So the agriculture side on crops can expand, but if there wants to be a 30,000 cow dairy, will they just get to use the water?
So they would need to have a non-irrigation grandfathered right, so a type 1 or a type 2. If they are able to obtain that, they would have to then be able to comply with the conservation requirements. The conservation requirements in the plan are there as precaution. We understand that there is not a dairy that's large enough to qualify with that. It's there as if it were to ever happen, we have those regulations set in place.
So something of industry that size still would need grandfathered water rights?
Yes.
Perfect.
I'm Nathan Watkins on Frontier Road in McNeil. I've got several questions. During the election, there was the huge push to include the whole watershed, including Bisbee. Yet on your active model, Bisbee is excluded. So is Record Canyon. Why doesn't the active model include the entire watershed?
So the active domain, y'all can hear me now. The active domain excludes anywhere where we identified hard rock or bedrock because there's no flow, and Bisbee lies in one of those areas.
Then why were they included?
So the statutory structure for subsequent AMAs requires that any subsequent AMAs be based on basin boundaries. At least one basin, could be multiple basins. So when the AMA was established from the INA, we had to base it off of those basin boundaries. There was a process back in the 1980s to draw basin boundaries that went through hearing processes and a formal legal adoption process. So we do have legally defined basin boundaries that ADWR was required to go off of for that process.
Okay, on the recharge models, you're using 84-year-old data. Isn't there anything newer?
Not that we could find. There's
Hi, this is Emily LaDolce. There is more current data out there online, but what we presented today is an initial estimate. As we develop the model and improve the water budget, we'll be incorporating modern data. Did that answer your question?
It does, but I remember one slide said there were like 52 wells. Well, White Farm has probably that many.
Yeah, let me
And it's-
clarify that. So what Sarah talked about today is our steady state groundwater model, which is a representation of pre-development conditions, as close to pre-development as we can get. Because of the data only going back so far, we picked 1940, and in 1940 there were some wells, and so that's what you saw on the slides. As we develop the model and bring it up to the current time, it'll have a period of record of 82 years, 83 years, and you'll see in the model that each year we will update the number of wells based on when they were actually drilled.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Last question. Crop selection is going to be limited by our highest water use over the last 5 years. For example, I have a field that I've only used in the wintertime to grow triticale. If I want to put it in trees, I can't. Anybody have a response to that?
So part of the design of an AMA is limitations on total water use based on historic use. So part of that design includes some individual conservation requirements that limit total water use. And part of that design is that individuals are limited in certain ways on whether they can increase their water use. That's part of the statutory structure. That's part of the design of an AMA, which requires all sectors of water users to contribute to reductions in withdrawals of groundwater in order to achieve the goals of the AMA.
I don't think I even run Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to ask these questions. And I have a couple of them. One question I have is that when we talk about the substantial cost within that 5-year period before the AMA went through, I'm assuming that also refers to people that bought within the 5 years the property, and the cost of the property is now deemed as a substantial cost. Am I understanding that correctly? I couldn't understand what you said.
If you could identify yourself.
I'm sorry, my name is Elaine Bailey.
So for substantial capital investment, they are a case-by-case process. We look at them individually, and we have a whole committee that looks at them.
But I'm a little confused.
Yes.
Okay, I'm a little confused with that response, because it was made clear on the verbiage that we've heard through the meetings and the literature that's been passed out that nothing was to be developed within that 5-year period. And I live off of Webb, and there are millions of trees that have gone in during that 5-year period. So I'm a little confused with that.
So with substantial capital investment, to answer your first question, the purchase of property within the one, so for substantial capital investment, it is 1 year. So it is August 30th, 2021 to August 30th, 2022. So if there was any financial purchases or investments into the land, that would bring it into irrigation or into production of irrigation. The purchase of that property does not count as substantial capital investment.
There is some small nuance to that. So 2 things here. The 12 months that Madison quoted applies for those areas of the AMA that were previously a part of the INA. There's a small strip of land kind of on the edge of the basin where that time period is 5 years instead of 1 year. The other piece of that, in most cases, you're absolutely correct that the purchase price of property would not apply towards substantial capital investment. But if someone can demonstrate that a differential was paid, so they paid more for the land because of existing irrigation infrastructure or those types of things, the department may consider those types of that kind of difference in purchase price as a part of substantial capital investment. So there's a little bit of occasional exception there.
Okay, I have several questions, so please be patient with me. One suggestion that would help me a great deal is that when you are discussing certain things on the plan, if maybe you could put that area of the plan up there to help all of us understand what you're discussing and being able to see it on the monitors. Okay.
That's all these slides will be posted on HW's website, and I can attach a draft.
I know, but we're here now. We're here now. And to hear the discussion going on, I feel like I'm kind of in the dark because I need to see what you all are discussing. Okay, so just food for thought. The next question I have is, you talk about people reporting their water usage. Well, I don't think everybody's honest, okay? And this is, we are looking at an honor system. And so how can you think that everyone's going to be honest? And I'm talking about corporate ag on what they report as far as water usage.
We understand that the reporting has been, we see the differences and change of how the reporting has changed over time. I will say that all people that are reporting, all people of previous INA holders, sign at the bottom of the annual report that they are certifying that that information is true and correct, legally binding them to that report that it is true and correct information. So if there is a stance of compliance, if there's a stance for us to pursue compliance efforts, we have that authority too.
Okay, and my last question is, how do you police the wells? Because I've watched wells go in at midnight.
So all wells need to be registered through the department. That is kind of up to a well driller's choice if he wants to go against his, I guess, record and authority on that, and we can pursue compliance records with that. We have a compliance team that is actively going and looking at wells in the systems.
Well drillers are required to be licensed through ADWR. And in order to drill a well, they are required to have a drill card on site present for that well. So there are mechanisms by which the department can pursue compliance, and that driller, if they are not following those requirements, could potentially lose their license.
Okay, because Natalie, you've been great, and I appreciate all the information over the last couple of years that have come my way. But I've just seen a lot of things that are not going along with the AMA. And that's real disturbing to me because that's what was voted in. And I don't see accountability. I'll be very honest with you. I don't see accountability held towards the people that are not doing right. And when is that going to change?
I appreciate the concern and the feedback and your involvement. These types of things take time. And we are still really in the thick of our establishment process here. When we laid out a timeline for establishing this AMA, we're looking at really a 5-year timeline before conservation requirements are effective, before we have really complete reporting, before we have things like a model that we can reference. It takes time. And I understand that interim time is frustrating and difficult and feels uncertain. It does, yes.
Well, it's hard to watch things that are going on that are really not legal.
Right. And as we work through our establishment process, it is my hope and our goal that those things start to be addressed as some of these requirements get finalized, as rights get issued, and it's more clear what people are and are not allowed to do.
Thank you.
And one clarification. An existing exempt well, from what my understanding of the statutes, is that if there's an existing exempt well, they can replace that well if they can drill a new well. So the AMA is not stopping drilling wells. But if the replacement well is within 660 feet of the existing well, then that doesn't count as a new well. That's just replacing an existing well.
So just for clarification, that is for non-exempt wells.
That's
non-exempt wells.
That's what I meant, non-exempt wells.
Non-exempt wells. So non-exempt wells are those larger wells, those greater than 35 gallons per minute. If it is in the same location, then you can drill a
new
replacement well. For exempt wells, new exempt wells can be drilled. So if you have a piece of property that you want to drill a well to serve your household, that is allowed, as long as that well is 35 gallons per minute or less, is not watering 2 or more acres of land, and is under 10 acre-feet for non-irrigation use. Exempt. Yeah.
We have a question online from a Melinda Whittington. Her question is there a timeline for the new management plan? There is the September 9th formal draft, but curious about the next steps.
Hi, Melinda. This is Madison. Yes, there are next steps. So we have the informal comment period up until September 9th. We will then take those comments that we receive and implement them into the plan as needed and publish a formal draft after that date. We're hoping mid-September, sometime after that comment period. Give us some time to work on it. Let me sleep a little bit. And after that, once the formal draft is presented, we will then go into the promulgation process, and thus having a hearing and having findings on those hearings, and then having the adoption at the end of the year. Hopefully, if our timeline goes well, that's what we're hoping for. At the end of the year, this management plan be adopted. Hopefully that answers your question, Melinda. Thank you.
We have another question online. Relevant. So you guys are saying no new wells can be drilled even if the total water extracted is below the IGR allocation.
So any new non-exempt wells that will be drilled, if it's not a replacement well in the same location, a new non-exempt well will require some kind of withdrawal authority attached to that well. So if you are drilling a new well to serve property that has an application for an irrigation grandfathered right, we do have a process to potentially approve that well while those rights are pending. Anthony, I don't know if you want to say more about that, or I would certainly refer to our wells team for more information about that.
Yeah, Anthony Perono, Deputy Counsel with the department. And then of course, for exempt wells, the process is a little different. It of course still needs to be applied for and registered through the department, but those restrictions are different.
And excuse me, that I didn't clarify that question was asked by Nad as well. Thank you.
Nathan Zook from McNeil, Arizona. I purchased 1,000 acres 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. And I've had 973 acres total with 960 acres of the water rights. Had 6 pivots on this place. And then I lost 240 acres of the water rights. I want to know if I'm going to get compensated or what the plan is for the water rights that you stole from me through this whole process. I had plans and you guys botched my plans.
Our role as ADWR is to implement the statutes as written. Anthony can chime in if he's comfortable with some additional information, but our role is to implement the statutes as written. And as written, the statutes indicate that land that was not irrigated in the 5-year period that we look at for the AMA cannot be irrigated going forward. If there is substantial capital investment in the appropriate time period. So as we indicated earlier, if you can demonstrate that there was a premium paid for that property, the applicant has the burden of proof to demonstrate that there is a difference in what was paid for that property as opposed to what might have been paid for an equivalent property that did not have irrigation infrastructure installed. So if there is information that you can submit to us, we can certainly consider that as a part of substantial capital investment. But our role as a state agency is to implement the statutes as written.
Additionally, again, this is Anthony Perono, Deputy with the Council. Thank you for providing that perspective. We take these things very seriously. We do. And as Natalie mentioned, these are laid forth in statute. ADWR has no power to pass statutes on our own. These are all statutes passed by the legislature, and Arizona law through courts as well as through the legislature state when water is considered to be a property right of an individual. It needs to be used under Arizona law.
I signed the deed. I had all the documentation, along with all my stuff.
And we'd be happy to review.
Put Bisbee in this situation, never been involved in it in the first place. Nobody knew about Bisbee being in the boundary. at voting time. It was all that much. Now we're at today, and it goes and gets great. It's in. And now this place, and what would you do if you were in my position? Put yourself in my position. I have this property, and you're taking the livelihood from me, and I get no compensation. That's baloney. Okay, how you spend that, that's not right. If you want to take my right, you need to pay me extra $100. That's fair value. I paid more when I bought it. Because I have all the documentation.
Sir, I appreciate that it's a difficult situation and that you're frustrated, and we would be happy to make staff available to talk to you about your specific situation after the meeting.
My name is Ray Zook. I own a farm south of Elfrida. Now, there was discussion here today about substituting acres. And over the years, I have personally been involved in substituting acres with the department under the INA. I have some acreage that is very salty. And we farm it, but it is challenging. My question is, if I find a property of my neighbors that is conducive to production, will you allow me to move acres to another property and abandon the acres that I'm going to substitute with, and then also allow me to drill a non-exempt well?
So
to replace the wells I'm currently using on the salty ground. Am I making sense here?
yes, you are. This is Madison Moreno. To answer your question, with substitutions, we look at, like you say, the ground salty. It's not giving is what you can get out of the crop that you're producing. So through an application process through the department of substituting those acres to your neighbor's farm, you would be able to substitute that IGFR and that same footprint. So let's use the example of 100 acres. 100 acres aren't viable anymore. You're not able to produce enough what you're asking to produce. You can move that 100 acres with that substitution application, and pursuant to your right, IGFR right, you can drill a non-exempt well.
Does that acreage have to be contiguous? Oh, that was my next question. Is there going to be a distance factor in this substitution of acres?
So the substitution process is extensive and detailed, and is in a lot of instances very case by case. So it's hard for us to answer some of those questions in theory, but we would be happy to have staff available to talk with you in more detail about your particular situation and your concerns there. There's a lot of nuance and things that we may or may not approve under different circumstances.
Okay, I appreciate all that, and it all makes sense to a point. However, one cannot make a decision based on hypotheticals, but you're expecting me to do that, you see. In the past, I've moved acres. We've moved acres, and we've got along just fine. But if I invest, say, $500,000 in a piece of property, not knowing if you're going to allow me to do this, that's a pretty big deal.
I very much understand that that's a challenging thing.
So how can I apply, or how can I get an answer before I make a decision?
So my recommendation would be to seek legal counsel on that statutory structure and what may or may not be allowable under that statutory structure. We cannot provide legal advice or indicate ahead of an application, whether a given application would be approved or not.
I just had a quick comment with regard to that, Natalie, because I believe when questions were asked during the whole process, it was pointed out by your staff that it had to be continuous or, butting up against. So where is the exact language? Is that somewhere in that book that Ron has, or is it included in this management plan? Because then, I think if it's written in black and white, it's one
Fair.
thing as opposed to.
So the contiguous thing might be a little bit confusing because in order to apply for example, multiple parcels under a single application, those would need to be contiguous. But there's a little bit of additional nuance in the substitution statutes where that might be applied a little bit differently. So we might be talking about two different things. And I apologize for the confusion there. For applications for irrigation grandfathered rights, that initial issuance of an IGFR, that IGFR footprint must be contiguous. So, but once you have that IGFR and you might be substituting acres, there's a little bit of nuance on where those acres can be substituted, and that is going to have a little bit more case-by-case nuance to it. Did
But
that,
based
hopefully that
off
helped.
of what Madison is looking at, or
I think that's in the administrative code, isn't it?
So the substitution of acres is in statute 45, 465, 01, and 02. So those are the
can you say that again, please?
45-465.01 and 02. That is for the substitution is, think future when we have IGFRs in place for any uses that need to be moving that footprint for use.
Correct.
The contiguous portion, I think, is what we're talking about, is when applying for that IGFR. If you had multiple INAs or multiple parcels that are all contiguous, you can combine that into one application and it has one IGFR with all those contiguous parcels on that. That's, I think, where we're getting confused. Is that answering your question?
It does. I mean, I've just wanted to let you know I'm not confused. You might think I'm confused, but I do know that the point of contention of switching acres, that was one of the major things I think that brought on the AMA, and that's why I think during the whole process that was asked specifically, and so now it's just being brought up, and it just kind of seems like now it was a for sure thing, now it's a maybe case by case. I'm just trying to see, like, okay, so what is actually making that determination?
So we can't necessarily guarantee that any given application will be approved, right? So I think the line we're kind of trying to toe here, if you will, is what can we say for sure is allowable as a generalization, and what do we need to be careful about how we say it because we don't want to mislead anyone that something is a done deal. So that's what we're kind of trying to be careful about in the way that we're speaking, and I know that's frustrating. So what the nuance is here is that there are provisions that allow for the substitution of acres. There are specific requirements associated with that process for substituting acres. So there's criteria that the department reviews and considers. And there's not necessarily an upfront guarantee that we can give to anybody that a given application would objectively be approved, because we haven't seen that application yet and don't know the facts of the case.
Gotcha.
We have another question online from a Nav Athwell. Will the allocation change based on what is planted? So if corn is replaced with alfalfa, will the allocation go up?
No, the allotment would not change with crop change in subsequent years. So with that, it's based off of the allotments based off of historical cropping patterns. So if there was corn grown in those 5 years, like let's say only corn grown within those 5 years of historical irrigation, the allotment would be based off of that. And if there was a change in crop type, you decide to randomly decide you wanted to grow alfalfa, that allotment would stay the same from that switch. This Madison Moreno, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself.
I've got another question. Nathan Watkins again. Is the department looking at the applications that we filed back in March? Are those in process? Or are you waiting for this new deadline? And then the next follow-up question is, do we report our water use under a new number that doesn't exist, or do we use our old INA number?
We are in the process of reviewing all the applications that we're receiving. We are still receiving application as that deadline has not passed yet. So once that deadline passes, we will no longer be receiving applications, and we will then begin that 180-day objection period where the registry of all applications received will be posted, and the public will be able to object to any application that they see based off of factual objections. With that, we are still reviewing these. With the reporting, we ask that you report with your 79 number, which is your assignment number, the application number, we call it an assignment number, or your 60 number, whichever you feel comfortable with. It's going to be a learning curve for all of us. We're going to be in the process of trying to figure out this new reporting style, and it'll take time for us to get to how it's supposed to be. And we understand that, and we're here to work with you on the reporting aspect of it. We have a system where we can connect the 60s to your assignment numbers, so we know where that falls into our system. So we're able to keep track of these applications or the annual reports.
Assignments under the old 60 numbers into the new 79 number, that's a gray area there. One, I don't know what my 79 number is. So I don't know if I got it when we applied. I remember we handed the packet to you.
I know you have a picture of me.
Yeah, we do. So anyways.
Yes, so those assignment numbers are still being sent out as we're reviewing and processing these applications. With that, we have a way of connecting all those 60s to, think of it kind of like a spider web, all those to the 179 number. We're keeping track of it. It's a process for sure, but the reporting side of things will become a lot clearer. And we'll have annual reporting workshops. We've had them in the past, but we're going to continue those once time gets to that reporting part of March 31st of next year. But we're here to work, the whole section is here to work with you on the annual reporting, and everyone who has questions on it. It's going to be a learning curve for everyone, not just previous INA authority holders, but for everybody.
Madison, could I ask you a quick question related to what Nathan was talking about? Will you be emailing us out our forms with the appropriate numbers on them so we can file for our annual reporting, or do we have to do something different?
So we have a system where we notify holders. We'll be sure to include that this year to put in the assignment numbers into our system. We'll send out postcards. We will also send out email reminders for annual reporting. So there will be a way of contacting you all for the annual reporting process.
And though your contact will have the appropriate 55
Yes.
number or 79 number.
Yes, it will have the number in a bright red box.
So the ball's in your court. We don't have to worry till we hear from you.
Exactly, yes.
Thank you.
Nathan Zook again, a question regarding the the 180 days, if that is contested by neighbors or whatever, what's the process at that point?
So during the 180-day objection period, we are taking any objections from the public that are on a factual basis. So anything that, say the information is incorrect or anything that we need to look into further, we have that stance. But the 180 days is the 180 days. From residents of the basin. Mhm. Thank you.
Well, do they have, I mean, residents in general or neighbors? I mean, what's residents of the whole basin?
Yes.
Particular to one person or to everybody?
So the way the statutory provision is written is that a resident in the basin can object to any application based on the facts of that application. Basically, the objection has to be that the facts of that application are not sufficient to issue a grandfathered right on those facts. So that's kind of a limitation on those objections.
So real quick, Aaron Cardona, like jumping off of what he says. So at what point, if someone objects to that, do you have a opportunity to defend yourself, or what, or then that then gets kicked back to the applicant? What happens there?
So we will have a process by which we process those objections and consider those objections. We will make sure that an applicant knows about any objections on their application. So there will be a process for providing additional information and that type of thing, yes.
Okay.
And Anthony Perano, if it becomes clear that more information is required from the applicant, we have the ability to request that to clear anything up.
Thank you.
I think that's all the questions.
There's no more questions online.
Okay.
Really appreciate it. I just wanted to say thank you to the council for the really, really good comments and questions on the management plan. It's really clear that you spent time reviewing it and considering about it. I really appreciate that. I want to say thank you to the folks in the room and online today for the really excellent questions. We know this is a challenging process as we're establishing this brand new AMA, and we really appreciate all the patience and the thoughtfulness that's going into this process. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone.
Hi, my name is Sue Macon, and my question is from the original, I don't know what you call them, documents that were drawn in 1980 and written as gospel. Are there plans? Are there any plans, or have there been any updates or rewrites of that? Or are we just still sticking with, there's still INAs, is that correct or no? There are still some INAs, not everything is AMA.
So if I understand the question correctly, you're asking if like the statutory structure, the legal structure around AMAs and INAs has changed. So there was a law passed in 1980 that created the structure of water regulation, groundwater regulation in Arizona, where we have some areas that are largely unregulated with some limited requirements, INAs and then AMAs. Some of those statutes have changed in some ways over time since the 1980s. So there have been some legislative changes to those statutes over time, but there's, gosh, the last one I know of that I can think of quickly off the top of my head was probably in the like late 2000s-ish. So it's been some time that I can think of off the top of my head. There might be something I'm missing there. In any case, those statutes created provisions to allow for subsequent AMAs. So what's really new here is the implementation of those subsequent AMA statutes. And that's why we talk so much about this being a really new thing, and that Douglas is really different than those initial AMAs, is because it's the first time we've used those statutes, not that they're new statutes.
High school regarding Mexico. And how do we, as Douglas Basin people, farmers, ranchers, how do we have a clue how much water goes to Mexico and what are the controls for that?
Sure. So the regulatory authority of the state of Arizona is limited to the boundaries of the state of Arizona. So the AMA applies within the state of Arizona, within the Douglas Basin, the portion of the Douglas Basin that is within the state of Arizona.
So
with
answer.
With some of the scientific information that we're evaluating, that our modeling team is doing, that Sarah was so nice to present today, and thank you for that. We are considering and evaluating how water moves physically within the basin, which includes across that international boundary. But the regulatory structure that an AMA creates applies only within the state of Arizona.
So basically, we have no clue how much water goes there that we have.
We do
that
not have
we
any
are
regulatory
accountable for,
authority.
and it blows right past us and keeps going.
We do not have any regulatory authority outside the state of Arizona. We can estimate and consider that water flow, but there's no regulatory authority outside of the state of Arizona.
If there's not any other questions, we'll move forward at your discretion, Chair.
Chair, just one additional question. I think one of the things that City Douglas has brought up in the past is the international aspect of this. And one of the suggestions I'm really glad is we're going to get some information out of the study. But to elevate it, there is an International Border Water Commission. There are international groups that coordinate. These are part of the issue, and there are neighbors. So to have the ability to at least raise these issues from the state level to these international commissions, at least try to get some traction with it.
Thank you, Elise. Unless there is an objection, I will adjourn the meeting. Hearing no objections, the meeting is adjourned at 3:22.
You're too good at that banging. I know, I'm scared.